All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Defining the New Normal buzz session for reimagining the legal profession post-pandemic. We're very excited today to bring forward two big groups within the ABA to talk about what the practice of law will look like, uh, hopefully once we get to that new normal. We'll be having a joint program with the ABA YLD and the Practice Forward group. So I'm going to introduce us quickly. My name is Chris Brown. I'm honored to be the chair of the ABA YLD this year, and I'm going to go through some housekeeping and then we will begin our program. As you may note, we are recording today's program so that way folks who would like to learn more about what the Practice Forward group is doing can watch this at a later date. As you know, right from the title, we are going to be breaking out into breakout rooms for our buzz sessions because we are honored and lucky that our ABA leaders want to hear from those of you in the profession about what you would like to see the ABA work on over the coming months and years. Those breakout sessions will not be recorded. Everything else will be. During this main session, when we give the presentation, please be sure to mute your microphone and leave your camera off. When we break out into the breakout rooms, please feel welcomed to do the opposite. Turn on your cameras, turn on your mic. We want to see you, we want to hear from you, and we are looking forward to those buzz sessions. The overview of this program will consist of the following. We are going to hear welcoming remarks from the ABA president. We are then going to hear an introduction of the Practice Forward survey results and the report. We're going to hear about the current initiatives and policies that both the ABA Practice Forward group and the YLD are working on. And after that, we will transition into our breakout sessions. Just so you know, the breakout session, you don't have to do anything. Our moderators and staff will automatically place you into a breakout room. So you don't have to worry about selecting a room or anything like that. That will be taken care of for you. We are going to stay in those breakout sessions for about half an hour. When we come back from that, the YLD leaders within those rooms who have been pre-designated will be taking notes and they will share what they hear from those breakout sessions. After that, we're going to hear closing remarks from our YLD chair-elect Troy Portis, and our program will conclude. So with that, it is my honor to turn the microphone and the stage, so to speak, over to ABA President Rifo, who is a partner at Snell and Wilmer in Phoenix, where she chairs the firm's professional liability litigation group. President Rifo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's particularly a pleasure to talk about how the Practice Forward work got started and give you a little bit of a highlight of what they've been working on. When this pandemic started last year, my predecessor, Judy Perry Martinez, and I sat down and among lots of other things we worried about, we started talking about what kind of resources the American Bar Association should bring to bear to help lawyers work their way through this pandemic and practice and move forward during the pandemic and after. And so that is where the Practice Forward initiative came from. Our notion was not to put together a group that was going to come up with every answer, but rather to put together a coordinating task force that would pull together all of the resources inside the American Bar Association and elsewhere that were devoted to figuring out what's what of practice during the pandemic and resources that could make lawyers more productive and more efficient and be able to practice through the pandemic and beyond. We found two fabulous chairs to work on this project, both of whom you'll hear from in a moment, Bill Bay and Laura Farber, two experienced leaders in the American Bar Association, and a group of wonderfully dedicated other leaders to work with them. And what they have done in these almost 12 months now since they were launched is to, as I've said, pull together resources that help lawyers to be better lawyers in this moment of great challenge and difficulty. The website is magnificently organized, and I'm sure they will talk with you about that, but they did one thing in addition that is really important and that you're also going to hear about today. And that is a survey of thousands of you across the country to talk about what's really going on with lawyers in this moment. And the results of that survey have guided their work and guided the work of the rest of the association. I look forward to being part of this program today and to hearing from you about what you think the future holds for us and how this association can do an even better job at serving you and serving your needs as we move forward and out of this pandemic. So it's a joy to be with you. And with that, I will turn this program back over to one of the Practice Forward co-chairs, Bill Bay.
Thank you, Trish. Progress on these important issues begins with leadership. Thank you for leading. It really makes a difference. Let me also thank the YLD leadership team for making this happen. You've heard from Chris Brown. You're going to hear from Troy Portis and Daiquiri Steele, who are here. Change doesn't occur without vision. YLD has a vision and are making this happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you for letting us be part of this sharing experience and listening experience. Let me tell you just a little bit about the Practice Forward team. Laura Farber, who you're going to hear a lot from in the next few minutes, and I are privileged to talk with you today as co-chairs of the Practice Forward group. But it truly, as Trish said, is a team effort. We are the lucky ones to serve with attorneys and staff who are dedicated to delivering what you need to help navigate pandemic waters and the post-pandemic waters. The group was created last May, as Trish Rifo said, by both President Martinez and her action. And the goal was to take quick action to meet the challenges facing our profession. It's the kind of thing you would expect from the ABA, helping members navigate these tough times. We can't say enough about our working group members. Many of them are with us today and will be in the listening sessions. And we have great staff support from Katie Engelhardt, who makes it all go well as some great marketing folks. So let me turn to the next slide here so we can get started. We want to talk about several things today, about the pandemic, how the profession's changed, how we can help you as you adapt to a new environment, and how we can together meet the challenges of a profession that will change as we emerge from the pandemic. It is a big task, but it is one that the ABA is uniquely positioned to do. So where did we start? Well, we started by asking people, what are the challenges? What are your concerns? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? And so we created and sent this groundbreaking Practice Forward survey to members. And we heard from nearly 5,000 ABA members in September and October last year. And as the survey report showed, it's a pretty good representative sample. And all the details are in there, and I won't go through that. But today we're about giving you a brief overview. But you should check out the report in the link, and I assume it'll be posted in the chat. It's a 75-page report. It's full of data, findings, and recommendations. I think you'll find it well worth the read. But today is also an opportunity, beyond us giving you an overview, it's an opportunity for us to speak to and hear from you about your concerns, your needs, what needs to be addressed. We have ABA officers, leaders, task force members here to listen in the breakout groups, because together we're about providing you what you need to be a lawyer who makes a difference for your clients and for your communities and where you work. So that's kind of where we're going today. Laura, why don't you take us through the survey findings from a 20,000 foot level? A lot of things here. We won't get them all, but she's going to touch on the really big ones.
Thanks so much, Bill. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. This survey was very eye-opening in many respects, but also very telling and maybe, I think, very realistic. But now the question is, what are we going to do with it? So let me start with some of the big picture areas that came through in the survey. First of all, really interesting, more than half of all lawyers work from home 100% of the time at this point in time. I don't know what that's going to look like going forward, but we have quite a few that have been doing that. Also, much to probably nobody's surprise, lawyers have been overwhelmed with everything they have to do. And specifically, the concerns are employer support. Am I going to have the resources? Are they going to know what I'm doing? The recognition for the work that's being done? And how secure is my job? when I'm not in the office and folks don't see me and may not be as aware of what I'm doing. Client access, developing business, huge challenge. Obviously, different platforms, different ways of doing that. Are the expectations going to be the same? How will that work? Billable hour requirements. Should they have been reduced? But they have not been reduced. So what is that causing? Higher levels of stress, trying to manage when you're working from home as well as work. A lot of levels of disengagement from work. And part of that is not necessarily driven by the environment, but what's going on during the pandemic. Greater thought about, is this worth it? Do I really want to stay in this profession? Do I want to stay doing what I'm doing and continuing to feel the way that I'm feeling? And most of its impact that we have found is definitely hitting square on the lawyers with young children, and especially women. A lot of folks are positive about having enough business to meet revenue goals, which is really interesting because some of these are kind of ironic. You would think maybe there's concern about that, but there seems to have been a positive flow in that regard, not across the board, but generally. And probably not unexpected, anticipating a need for less office space as more firms consider flexible work policies and even allowing a lot of folks to work from home. So how much space will they actually need? Now, lawyers still want to keep a private office, but what's that going to look like and how often will it be used? The data raised questions about culture and engagement. Culture is a huge one. What is the work culture going to look like? What does it look like now? And as we face reentry, what will it look like? How will we engage, especially with if there's flexible work time and hybrid policies? You can go to the next slide now, Chris. And some of the data that stand out, and I've already touched on some of this, but there are tremendous pressures on women with children. Women have to do it all, and many have always had to do it all, but during this pandemic, it really brought so much to this to fruition, given the challenges with childcare and with schooling, generally speaking, especially when many parents of young children, male and female, but mostly women, had to work through not only having children at home, but online learning, balancing that and what they were doing with work. And they were expecting and hoping to have more supportive, engaged employers. Some of them did, many of them have not. They're looking for comprehensive plans for sick and family leave and subsidies for childcare and tutoring or family care, many of which have not been provided, but hopefully will be. It's clearly a need. The other area that has seen a huge need are effective diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And specific questions were asked about these issues. Examples, feeling stress on account of race and ethnicity. Only 7% of white lawyers felt stress as a result of race or ethnicity, and 47% comparatively of lawyers of color feel stress at work, at least sometimes, based on race or ethnicity. 19% feel stress very often or almost all the time. 54% of lawyers, and this is the intersectionality comment, gender and race or ethnicity have had challenges as compared to white women, 16%, and men of color, 41%. So there's some dramatic differences, but that double bind is clearly present. And women and lawyers of color are much less optimistic about the legal profession as a whole. And you may have read in all kinds of publications about large numbers of women that are either leaving the profession or are thinking about going part-time. And this is part of the issue that our survey definitely identified. And the data beg the question, is the legal profession positioned long-term to be as diverse and inclusive as the country as a whole? Are steps being taken to achieve that? Are policies being developed? Are recognitions taking place? Okay, Bill, next slide is for you.
We're also asked to be sure you don't mute yourself, as I just did. Uh, we asked a lot of questions about what people saw about the future. What did they anticipate? And they're very interesting results. And again, dive into the data. It's really fascinating. There is a lot we do not know about the future. Hey, that's a keen grasp of the obvious. But even in the survey, there are equally divided views about whether the law practice will rebound or grow, whether hiring will increase or decrease. Almost equal numbers say yes, no, positive, negative. But there are fairly certain trends that we do know. Number one, remote working is here to stay in some form. Why? People like it. It works. Okay. Number two, flexible work trends are growing and here to stay. We had some before. This has greatly accelerated the process. You'll see it in the survey. Again, people like it. Number three, the profession has discovered and is starting to embrace lawyer well-being. Many of you would say, hey, it's about time. That was not true 20, 30 years ago. We're seeing that now. It's being embraced. Number four, workplace culture is more important than ever. We knew that. We knew culture was important, but we're realizing we can't emphasize it enough. Culture really matters. Five is diverse and inclusive workplaces are more important than ever. It's got to be more than talk. Accountability counts, and tools that measure accountability are crucial. And I thought somewhat striking is that how many people didn't know there were tools or didn't understand about measuring those kinds of matters. That was a discouraging finding there. So the survey report presents an opportunity for you as young lawyers to present data and solutions and be part of the change that we need to meet the moment. And so what we've done is got a lot about resources. Laura, tell us about the resources that the survey identified that are there to help us get there.
Well, interestingly, there wasn't one type of member service that most ABA members agreed would be helpful or useful. So nothing really stood out as the most important, but certain services appeal more obviously to women or lawyers of color or younger lawyers. For example, the mental health and well-being space is huge and is super important. And clearly resources in that area are not only needed and expected, but need to be distributed, disseminated, and talked about. And also the stigma relating to seeking that kind of information. And I'll talk about that later when we talk about some of the resolutions that we put together. Guidance about ways to implement effective DEI programs. Clearly the need is there. How to make it happen and how to make it work effectively, hugely important. Lots of resources needed for working parents. And obviously the pandemic has brought this and heightened the need for this to everyone's vision and need to deal with. We've got to figure out how to deal with this. Robust mentoring and sponsorship programs also hugely important in this work environment and as we confront and face the reentry that's coming up. And then providing opportunities to participate in pro bono programs, given the huge need for legal services, especially during the pandemic and what it's looked like. You can go to the next slide, Chris. And young lawyers in particular identify things that they're interested in, consistent with some of the things that you would expect. For example, guidance about business development. And that to me is not something that's necessarily new because of the pandemic, but it clearly was exacerbated during the pandemic. Guidance about staffing models. I mean, what are some of the alternatives that might be out there that folks might not even think about, but would consider? And then networking events, how to make that happen, even if you got to do it in a virtual setting. What are the different platforms, how to make it work and how to be out there doing what is expected, even though you can't necessarily do it in the traditional way or ways that you might have thought about or learned about previously. And then connecting to affinity groups and others for support, for reaching out, and for additional resources. The data point to an overall strategy of targeting programs to various member groups. I mean, clearly this needs to happen. We need to find ways of making sure that we are making resources available and that they are targeted and that we develop this cohesively, whether it's we, the ABA as a whole, or we, the ABA with YLD, things need to happen in that space. Bill, you want to talk about some of the best practices for employers?
Yes, this would be great. Let's talk about, this is the last 15, 20 pages of this report are really critical. And because based on the survey and what we have heard, the question came is, what are the best practices we can use in our workplaces and our own careers? Because it's great to have data, great to see what the shortcomings are, but it's not as good if we don't have solutions and suggestions and things that can be used by you and by employers. And so the report separates these into really 10 items for employers and 7 for individual lawyers. We're going to talk about some of the highlights, but I strongly commend to you the report, which is 15 to 20 pages of the report is this toward the back end. But here's the summary. Practical things every employer can do to make their workplace ready for the challenges of a post-pandemic world. And from a young lawyer perspective, the best part of it is you do not have to be the only voice in an employment setting saying, gee, I think we ought to do this and that. The survey report gives you a seat at the table. The ABA is here to empower you to be an important voice where you work in being part of a group that fashions solutions for your employment setting that are appropriate for that setting. So let's talk about the top 10. This is part 1, the first 5. I mean, some of this, leaders lead best when they listen first. That's why we're here to listen to your concerns. Leaders also respond best when they're presented with data and practical solutions. And that's why the report is organized in the way it is. It's not a difficult thing to forward to people in charge of your organization's leadership and say, hey, here's data we discovered from young lawyers, from ABA, that can be used here by the firm. I think some of these are really important. The issues highlighted in number 2, 3, and 4, 5 are real and shown in the survey. While it's true in the survey, it's also true in every employer setting. Leadership has to change and engage. When you take a look at diversity, equity, inclusion, the survey showed 47% of lawyers of color feel stress at work on account of their race or ethnicity. 52% of women lawyers feel the same thing because of their gender. These are real findings that go throughout the profession. Leaders who are paying attention have to understand they have to deal with those issues and to have solutions, and then use data to measure what it is that we're having. And let me go back to the first 1 through 5, Chris, by the way. Because I was surprised at how little people understood about strategies, benchmarks, and data. I think it's really important that you get those. Frequent communications. I don't know, in our place, we get lots of communications about the pandemic, what's going on. People need to know what's happening, especially when you're working from home, especially when we're in a hybrid, especially when we have flexible schedules, so that people know what's here and know what's happening, and leaders are going to engage in those kind of communications. And then also, I think having written policies, again, part of this, so you know what is happening, and then having a long-term view. Some of these suggestions that are here cost some dollars. I get it. But in the end, they really make a difference in terms of in long-term value to you as in a career position, and also to your employer. Let's take a look at the next 5, Chris, if you can. Sorry to get ahead of you. 6 and 7, the metrics and the compensation systems. Again, I was somewhat surprised that especially lawyers in leadership in firms did not seem to understand that there are tools to help measure these kinds of things that are out here. And so there are, and we're prepared to give you some of those and access to those. The big things, 8, 9, and 10, I think really strike home. Laura's talked about them. Everybody's talked about them. 1/3 of our surveyed members have dependent children at home, and significantly higher percentage of women. Lack of daycare resources has made the demands on working parents, and particularly women, much worse. Organizations need to consider things like defraying childcare costs, providing parental workshops, more parental leave. Again, some of these are going to cost, but the long-term benefits are not insignificant to an organization. And I recognize there is a tendency on the part of leaders to sometimes suggest the way we did it was much different. I like to say it's true that I did walk uphill both ways to and from school, but it's just not very relevant anymore. Nobody cares. It's not helpful. And so all of us, and especially leaders at legal employers, have to see the world and challenges for what they are now. And so that's where I think our advice is to employers. Here's the data. Here's what's likely happening at your place. Here are practical solutions. Some cost more than others, but again, solutions. Laura, anything to add on those?
No, I think we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And this is for individual attorneys too, which was really great. I mean, I'm thrilled that there's, best practices for employers, but also what can you do as an individual? And a lot of this is common sense, but set realistic expectations for yourself and others around you. And this will help also with the mental health perspective, negotiate the boundaries at work and at home. Another really great tip, not easy to implement, believe me, I know, I get it, but you got to do it. Know when to ask for support. Don't be afraid to ask for support when you need it. Find ways to stay visible with your clients, with parents, with other lawyers in the firm, and in the legal community. And be proactive about your career. Take the steps. You matter. Self-care matters. We tend to not focus on self-care. It's hugely, hugely important. And then volunteer, if you've got time. After you've gone through this whole list, I mean, that's not an afterthought, because there's so much joy and reward that you get from volunteering. But that comes with a balance. And the balance is taking care of yourself and setting all these realistic expectations, which I think can make a huge difference. I think we're now ready to move on to the next part of our program, which talks about the current initiatives and policies that we're focusing on. So Bill, do you want to start with some of the things that we've done on the next slide, Chris?
I'm muted again. So what have we done so far in response to all that? I can't take me anywhere, guys. Come on. But what have we done so far in response to all this? Well, there's quite a bit, but let me touch on a couple. And everything we do, we try to make sure that we're member focused and member facing. Like Amazon, we deliver something valuable to your home, practical resources you can use every day. So let's talk website. I think there's a link to the website, I hope, in the chat. It's www.ambar.org/practice forward. It was launched just prior to the annual meeting last August. It features practical tools and resources from across the association to support and advance the practice of law in the judicial system. Resources are broken down into three main categories: law practice management, practice of law, and professional development. Where does the content come from? All across the ABA. The idea and the goal is to give members the best of our association's content in these three areas. What about searching? Yeah, glad you asked. We created a special search function that just looks at what is posted within the pages of the website devoted to the Practice Forward content. Now, where can you find us? If you don't remember the web address, we occupy prime real estate on the front page of AmericanBar.org. In the cyber world, that's beachfront property with an unobstructed view. We're on the front row. Check out hundreds of articles as well as CLE, and most important, you can access the whole survey and the report. What if you can't find what you need on our site? Contact one of us. We want to be responsive to what you need, and that's one of the key reasons we're here to serve, to help our members and profession be the best they can be. But we're not done. In some sense, our work is just beginning, and Laura's going to give us a sense of what's ahead, because there's a lot ahead.
We've been doing a lot to try and get the word out. For those of you on social media, you've seen some of a promotion of not only this survey report, but our website, because it really does provide incredible value, but also coordinating the work of all ABA entities. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just promoting the good work that's out there, including the work the YLD is doing. And by the way, the YLD has been phenomenal on issues like well-being. And I know you're going to talk about that, but hugely important. And then the coordination that, like this program, is an example of that, and outreach, which we think is hugely important. We have a few CLE programs and webinars that you might want make note of. We have a reentry program series, and the kickoff program is going to be on June 28th. You'll hear about it if you're interested in issues relating to reentry, and there's a lot to talk about there. So much that a series is being worked on with Law Practice Division. And those dates will be June 28th, and then July 15, July 29, and then August 12th. They're Thursday day programs. And then we have a DEI CLE program focusing on strategies relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, working with the Diversity Center and partnering with a variety of other amazing ABA entities. July 26th, that CLE program will take place. And then we're going to have a webinar with state and local bar leaders to do similar outreach. That's going to take place on May 20th. We're very excited about all of that. Chris, can you go to the next slide? And something else I want to talk about, hopefully you've heard about two of our resolutions that we brought at mid-year. One had to do with child and family care policies, and also supporting funding for any congressional effort to fund childcare because, for example, entities like the US Chamber of Commerce are super supportive of things like this because it impacts our economy. When people have access to quality childcare services, they can work. And that's been one of the challenges that's come about, as you've heard about during the pandemic. Wellness, that was I think, doesn't happen very often, a unanimously approved resolution focusing on wellness and the need for resources and distribution and access to those. For example, our Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs for the ABA, and many state jurisdictions have them, have amazing resources. But the idea here is to eliminate the stigma and make the access available and make sure that employers are talking about these resources. The two resolutions that are going to come up for annual meeting will focus on reentry and the issues relating to the impact of the pandemic on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of reentry. So those two you're going to see coming up at the annual meeting. We've worked with other partners, Law Practice Division on the reentry, and then DEI with the diversity entities, in particular the Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity, and want to thank them for their work putting these policies together. And then the last policy we're going to focus on for mid-year of next year, and there may be more coming, but it focuses on ethics. And there is a comment to one of the ethics rules that deals with the definition of well-being. California, Virginia, and Vermont are the only entities that define well-being as including emotional, physical, and mental well-being and health. And we're trying to get everybody to come on board for that purpose. So that's some of the stuff. And I know we've thrown a lot at you that the coordinating group on Practice Forward is doing. And now I'd like to turn it over to the WildE so they can share the amazing work that they've been doing. Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Laura and Bill, especially for all the work that your group is doing on this. And then Choi, I'd just like to welcome you if you'd like to, say a few words. I'm going to run through some of the initiatives that we've been working on this year, including policy issues. And I'll try to be very quick. As Laura said, I know we are throwing a lot at you. But this year, some of the things that we've been really proud of, we started the year off with our Redefining Justice series, in the wake of all of the protests and racial unrest over the summer. We were really excited to be able to focus on this issue. Again, as we've mentioned with Practice Forward, this is, when we think about this, we are thinking about it holistically, even beyond the pandemic. So we are really excited about that. That series is still available online. And we had thousands of registrants and attendees for that program. Similarly, we had a well-being series in March. Every Wednesday throughout the month of March, we had a different topic we were focusing on. Again, very proud to say that over 1,000 attendees and registrants for those events as well, including the first time we've ever done a virtual book club. Again, we were trying to be innovative and reach people in this very odd year where we had to socially distance. We didn't get together like we so often do during a normal year. So we wanted to be able to reach our members across the country. And so we read Gina Cho and Karen Gifford's book, The Anxious Lawyer. Again, we knew we would want to focus on wellness and well-being this year, even before the pandemic started. So then when that came about, those issues, were highlighted all the more. And so we've had great turnout, great attendance for our well-being issues. At our fall conference, we had a really great program about mental health in the times of racial unrest with the host of the podcast, Three Psychs and a Mic. Again, a great program talking about here, to me, and as you're seeing in these issues and in the survey data, it's been a crazy year, and these things are very interconnected. And so I'm excited and happy to see that the ABA and the Practice Forward group are recognizing that and focusing on this and not just looking at things from a pandemic standpoint. Forthcoming, we have a well-being workshop on June 26th. I encourage everyone to check that out. One of the big pieces of feedback that we got when we were doing all of our well-being programming was that, people knew that there is a serious wellness and well-being issue within the profession, but they wanted more practical advice on what they can do to, lower their stress levels, take better care of diet and exercise and their physical health, get better sleep. And so this well-being workshop is going to be focused on that. It won't just be panels, telling you about all the problems within the profession. It's going to give you tools to make you healthier and better. Another thing that we're really excited about this year is our brand new ABA WildE podcast, Young Lawyer Rising. The thing that's so great about it, is that, one of our first episodes is about the pandemic and how young lawyers have responded to working from home and having virtual hearings. So, I would encourage everyone to check that out. We're very excited about it, very proud of the work that's been done. It's brand new, but it is available wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Pandora, etc. And of course, our longstanding publication, TYL, and our newer publication, After the Bar, have tons of great resources on all these things that we've been talking about. One of the topics that we've seen come up this year and we've been excited to provide content on is presenting virtually. As we just mentioned, people are having to adjust, and it's a much different skill set to present on a camera than it is in person. A lot of people probably got used to public speaking and appearing before a court or a jury. And then as soon as that happened, now it's time to take those skills virtually. So check those resources out. We've been very proud of what we've done there. And Joy, did you have anything that you'd like to add or anything I missed? Not to put you on the spot there.
No, you're good, Chris. Thanks so much. I just wanted to mention that next bar year, we'll definitely be continuing all of the great work in the wellness space that you've created, and a lot of the other pandemic related topics that we covered as well.
Great. Thank you, Choi. So then, as I mentioned, we've also done a lot with resolutions, and you'll see here looking at these, a lot of these have to do with response to the mess that we saw last year when it was the first pandemic bar exam. We saw all kinds of problems. We are extremely excited to have the support of the House. The YLD brought forth resolutions about remote bar exams, about encouraging jurisdictions to hit the pause button and make sure that bar exam takers can do so safely in the time of a pandemic. People shouldn't have to choose between continuing their career that they've been working on for at least 7 years and the health and safety of themselves and their families. I would like to just give a quick recognition. It's my understanding the chair of the House of Delegates, Barbara Howard, is also on today. So thank you, Chair Howard, for joining us, and thank you for your support over the past year and working with the YLD. As you can see here, but we also want to take things forward with online law school. So we've urged a section of legal ed to allow accreditation for all online schools in a post-pandemic world. The number one issue for young lawyers is student debt. Over 75% of all young lawyers at the time of graduation have over $100,000 in student debt. And so we think that a key component of helping that is also fixing legal education and making it more affordable. And our hope that is allowing schools to be accredited and have more online offerings will help do that. But we also have anti-discrimination resolutions regarding Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. As we've been highlighting here, young lawyers and lawyers with families and children have really, taken an extra hit over the past year, and not only having to adjust to work from home, but now be teachers and daycare providers for their children. So we have seen a lot. And then up on the horizon, policy in the works, again, the things that we've been talking about: flexible remote work policies, providing billable hour credit for DE&I work, which we think is very important. Again, just reiterating that we do think all of this stuff is interconnected. Making time for unplugged time to avoid burnout. One of the things that we hear time and again is now that people are working at home, they love the flexibility, but they're also always on. They're also always at work when you're working from home. So these are kind of some of the things that we're working on. I do want to try to keep us on track so we can break out into our buzz sessions. And so with that, I think now is the time to transition there. I just want to remind everyone that you don't have to do anything. We will be put into breakout rooms. And when we get into those breakout rooms, pre-designated young lawyer leaders will be taking notes and leading discussions with a preset of questions. So we are excited to hear from you. It's now your time to shine and tell us what you would like to see the ABA do moving forward. So with that, I will let ABA staff break us out into breakout rooms. All right, I believe we're all back. So I hope everyone found those breakout buzz sessions helpful. I can say in the group that I was in, it was a really wonderful experience to hear from a younger member of the ABA and get to ask these questions. So we are hoping to end just around a quarter after. And as we mentioned, we're probably going to briefly run through what our WildE leaders heard. So I will ask our WildE leaders maybe to, if you can, maybe highlight 1 or 2 things so we can keep our remarks close to 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can hand it off to Chair-elect Choi Portis so she can close us out. I'll just kick us off, and then I'll pass the baton, so to speak. Again, it was really great getting to hear from someone, and I'm just going to keep these comments anonymous, just so we can kind of share. They were really candid with us, and we appreciate that. But this person, one of the things that stood out to me was that they were talking about one of the reasons why they would like to go back to the office is because they have a hard time separating work life when they're at home. And I think this is something that we have heard time and again about. She has 2 young children. And, when she's at home, she's trying to, be a mother and also be a law firm associate. And that makes it difficult. And so she's one of those folks that would like to get back to the office, but also because she is from a rural area. And so she has a better internet and resources when she's at the office compared to when she's at home. So I really appreciated the comment about being out in a rural area. As many of you know, I'm in a small town. And so I think sometimes when the ABA, we do talk a lot about big law firms and we talk about big cities. And I think it's crucially important to remember that we also serve lawyers and Americans out in the country as well. So that'll be kind of the highlight that I talked about. And again, I'll pass my notes on to the WildE Administrative Director, Tamara Nash. So I will pass it on to Choi. If you'd like to share some remarks, Choi.
Sure, absolutely. We had a really good discussion as well. One thing that kind of stood out to me in our conversation was just about the last question. What would you like to see from the ABA when it comes to shaping the legal profession in the post-pandemic era? And that is making the ABA the voice of change. The person that made that comment basically said, if it's not the ABA that is the voice of change, and when it comes to how we operate in the profession, then who? They talked about, how rigid certain practices are, and I think that's really important that we, look to materials like office models or look to the House of Delegates to adopt some policies regarding, maybe return to work or flexible work schedules and things like that, or even the billable hour as well.
I'm just going to cold call on people. I hope that's okay. Sheila, would you like to share from your group? And if I call in anyone who's been in another group, just let me know and I'll go down the line.
Yeah, happy to, Chris. One of the things that stood out for us in terms of biggest concerns about going back to the office as a foil to things that we were we were concerned about in not going back to the office, a big talk was about losing the flexibility, kind of that ability to do work from anywhere, and the flexibility that has given a lot of people in their personal lives. Someone mentioned being able to, visit with a long distance partner over a week instead of just a weekend every couple of months, and then that they could still work together. And that was a thing that they're not going to be able to do when they go back to the office. Juxtaposed against a concern that when we're not in the office, we're going to lose some of that culture and those observational learnings that you get from being exposed to people, from working with more senior partners, sitting in the conference room with them and seeing how they handle different things, how they're looking at things, how they practice law. You're not going to get that without sometimes being in the office, and then whatever culture that you have in your firm and how that impacts keeping people there. If they're not bonded to your workplace, why are they going to want to stay there? So I thought those were some really unique things to consider.
Thank you, Sheila. Dacre, would you like to share what a highlight from your group?
Sure. I'm going to share two, but I'll do it in a short amount of time. The first one, going back to what you said about people in rural areas. So something came up about people in more urban areas. So one of our participants lives in New York and is concerned about not so much what is going to happen in the office, but what's going to happen on the way there. And so mass transit and issues with mass transit are really, really important and something we want to think about. And then also issues with respect to childcare. So for those individuals who have a daycare provider, that daycare can close on a moment's notice. If one of the teachers tests positive for the virus or has been exposed. And so, you know, you may think you have childcare and you may have it at 9 o'clock and not have it at 9:15. And so things dealing with daycare and childcare providers, some of which are not mandating that their employees actually get vaccinated. And so things of that nature are really important to lawyers as well. And I'll also just throw in privacy issues. And this is one that's near and dear to me. I work a lot with civil rights and education, so I might be on a sexual assault issue with a K through 12 child, right? And if everybody in my house can hear the Zoom, you know, then you end up with privacy issues there. So really some good content coming out of my group. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Daiquiri. How about Brandon Wolf? Would you like to share a highlight or two from your group?
Sure. Yeah, we had a great conversation and a few points about going into the office, and then also, of course, about the future of our profession. Regarding, you know, the return to the office, one of the participants said that, you know, there's a concern about losing the benefit of being a hands-on parent and losing the ability to be around your children on a regular basis and getting to explain to your children what you do. Along with also another concern is about, you know, people being vaccinated in the office. If everyone has been vaccinated, and then other participants shared that the stress has gone down a lot, knowing in one case that all the participants in our small office were vaccinated. And along those same lines, you know, with vaccinations, if concern if someone's taking, you know, all the actions to protect themselves, you don't necessarily know if everyone is being vaccinated, especially knowing the children can't get vaccinated yet. And then one final point about the future of our legal profession that we discussed is ending the billable hour, ending the necessary feeling of always being on, including on special days like Mother's Day, and trying to, if the ABA can try to do more about mentorship, especially, you know, teaching younger lawyers about how to react and deal with attorneys who aren't always respectful of your time. So that's a few of the highlights from our great discussion.
Thank you, Brandon. And then Tamara Nash.
Hi, we had a great breakout session, buzz session. Overall, the return has been really positive. Folks took relief. Generally, when we were working from home, folks took relief in being able to be home and that ability to have flexibility, but also avoid some of the charged conversations and the political climates that we were having, but also in the COVID climate of just physical safety, health concerns, because there were instances of COVID in the office. We also had a participant who welcomed a new baby. And so that was an exciting, but also very difficult to navigate with working from home. So that was an interesting point of conversation. And then the concerns were, again, just returning to work and navigating physical safety with COVID back in the work setting, and also navigating returning to in-person court and how that is balanced with the transition back to physically being in the office. And in regard to what would the participants want from the ABA was resources. And we discussed kind of that balance of the ABA wanting to be apolitical, but also, you know, taking a position on a lot of these issues being needed and wanted by young lawyers. And the resources that we discussed fell into two buckets. One being educational, so how that young lawyer can equip themselves to go into a meeting with a supervising attorney and have a conversation about, you know, data, what the trends are in the profession, profession, but also the second bucket being, in that empowerment enrichment bucket, to feel that they can go forward and have that conversation, that they can, conquer somewhat that generational rift of kind of harkening to Bill's story. He told us at the beginning of walking uphill both ways. So the young lawyer feels maybe a little bit more confident to say, yep, I understand, your position, but actually young lawyers do want and need. Actually, our profession does want and need. So those were the two buckets of resources that our participants discussed that they wanted, but overall, resources just to navigate the new normal. We had a great conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Tam. And now I'm going to turn it over to YLD Chair-elect Choi Portis and let her close us out.
Thank you, Chris. I wanted to start out by saying thank you all for joining us for this really important conversation. Obviously, the pandemic is not going to be around. We hope that it's not going to be around for too much longer, but we just wanted to make sure that we had this conversation. I wanted to take this opportunity also to recognize some folks. President Trish Rifo, President-elect Reggie Turner, President-elect nominee Deborah Enix Ross, almost President. Deborah Enix Ross, Michelle Banky, former ABA treasurer, Kevin Shepard, treasurer, and Barbara Howard, the chair of the House. I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank and recognize the Practice Forward working group members, Bill Bay, Laura Farber, recognize staff Katie Engelhart and Tracy Kemp, and from the YLD, just take an opportunity to thank YLD Chair Chris Brown, Tamara Nash, and also our YLD Speaker, Chris Jennison. Thank you all for joining, and stay safe and stay well.